Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about the eye drops murder trial, the Jesse Kurczewski murder trial that's going on up in Waukesha County with Judge Doro. And specifically, what I'm going to talk about is expert witnesses. Now, in the plaintiff's world, we use a fair amount of expert witnesses. If we have a medical negligence case, we've got to have an expert say it was negligence. If we have a wrongful death case, a lot of times we'll call the autopsy provider who did the autopsy and let them explain what cause of death is. A lot of times we need experts to give us the manner of death. For example, in an automobile accident where there might be a crashworthiness claim, where the car that was carrying the decedent perhaps had a roof crush during a rollover or something like that, then we'll put the expert on and have him say, what was the cause of death? What was broken neck? How did that broken neck occur? Well, the roof caved in and the trauma of the roof hitting the head of the victim is what caused the neck to break. Those are the kinds of things that we do in civil trials all the time. And as a result of that, I've come away with a little bit of an understanding of what a good expert is and what a bad expert is. And a good expert is almost always somebody who is pleasant, who is forthright, who is balanced, who understands that their role is to discuss facts and not take a side. A lot of times that works against the plaintiff. Sometimes it works against the state in something like a murder trial, where basically they have to concede, yes, I didn't do something, and why they didn't do something. And sometimes that's important. In this case, having just watched the closing arguments, it looks like the defense is making a big deal about the autopsy and the crime scene and the preservation of evidence. So all of these things are important, and you need an expert who can talk to the jury. Now, sometimes people are the world's best expert. Hey folks, please excuse the interruption, but let me ask you if you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you would, hit that like button and maybe even leave a comment. That tells YouTube that this is a valuable video and they'll refer it to more people. It helps me out a lot and I appreciate it. Thank you. They have written the book on it. They have published articles frequently about it. They've given scientific talks about it to other scientists, doctors, or whoever. All of these people are great, but they lack one thing, and that is they can't explain it in layman's terms. A lot of times when you know a lot about something, and all you have ever done is work in that field, for example, medicine, then instead of saying, we listened with the stethoscope on the patient's chest to see what their breath sounds were, somebody will say, well, we auscultated the chest, and auscultated is just a fancy word for we listened to the chest. A lot of times experts can't bring their level of expertise down to the jury. So you need somebody who is plain spoken. And that's not because jurors are dumb. Jurors have a lot of common sense and they can smell baloney a mile away. As a result of that, you want somebody who is not only credible, has a good CV and comes across as an expert in the field, but also you want somebody, like I said, who can talk to the jury and explain it in layman's terms. That's what defines a good expert. And in this particular case, the Kurczewski case, the state has its cause of death and manner of death expert as the medical examiner for Waukesha County. Now, the doctor has a very storied CV. We'll get to that here in a little bit. I'm not going to go through the CV because, frankly, I don't imagine any of you have enough no-dos to get through that. But and you don't come here to listen to somebody prattle on about, what their expertise is. But I wanted to point out a couple of things about how this whole thing goes off. So I want to start with how the state started, and that is to introduce the doctor and have her explain her role in this case.
Dr. Kurczewski, where do you work?
At the Waukesha County Medical Examiner's office.
In fact, are you the head of that office?
Yes.
Could you explain to the jury what it means to be the head of the Waukesha County Medical Examiner's office, please?
Okay. Medical examiners and coroners are a statutory position in the state of Wisconsin, and they're by county. And our job is to investigate deaths as defined by statute, which is basically any unnatural death or any death that's unexplained. That would include accidents, homicides, suicides, or deaths is again unexplained. We don't know which category they may fall into. And we investigate those deaths and may include performing an autopsy and laboratory studies to help with that investigation and certify those deaths. So that's our statutory responsibility. I am the head of the office, so I'm the administrator, but I'm also a forensic pathologist, and I perform the autopsies.
Now, one of the things that's frequently misunderstood is that the medical examiner is thought to be an arm of law enforcement, and in most cases it's not. I think, books like the Patricia Cornwell Scarpetta series with the medical examiner, and also the Quincy show, Quincy ME, that was on probably 20 years ago, where the medical examiner was all running around solving cases. I think a lot of times that these are the sort of things that get put out in popular media and people just seem to think about it. But the problem with that is if the medical examiner is not independent of law enforcement, then you have to be concerned about her findings as to whether or not they might be shaded toward law enforcement. So let's watch how the prosecution handles this issue.
Would it be fair to say that you are an arm of law enforcement?
No.
Okay. Could you please clarify that for the jury?
I'm a physician. I practice medicine. And the kind of medicine I practice has to do with the identification of causes of death and unnatural death. That's my training and background. I have no law enforcement training at all. And I do work with law enforcement. I also work with public health. I work with people who have an interest in understanding cause of death. But I don't work for the advocacy system, the law enforcement system.
Now, I'm not going to let you go. I'm not going to go into a great deal of depth here, but let's watch the prosecutor here lay out the fact that she has a 7-page CV.
Exhibit 33's received permission to publish as granted.
So, Dr. Kurczewski, I just want to make sure that the jury can kind of tell where we're looking. So on the screen along the right column, is it true that there's actually a page count?
Yes.
Okay, and so right now does it show that we're on page 1 of 7?
Yes.
And if Ms. Vulcanier could please scroll to the bottom of page 1, I'd like you to point out if there's an exhibit sticker on this.
Yes.
Okay, and so that's the same exhibit 33 that you just looked at?
Yes.
Okay, so if we could scroll back up to the top, please.
Now that CV is a tour, a guided tour through her education and experience, and it talks about all the things she's done, all the articles that she's written or co-written. And at one point she's very honest and says, look, a lot of times I write articles with people because they do the bulk of the work and I just lend my name to it. I think it's very honorable of her to say that, because a lot of people would have you believe that they are personally responsible for every word in those articles when that's just not the case. Now let's take a look at her autopsy experience.
You said that almost on a daily basis you are conducting autopsies, is that right?
Yes.
Are there different parts of an autopsy?
Yes.
Could you please explain those to the jury?
The first is the external exam, and I do that before the patient is altered. In other words, if a person comes in with clothes and medical devices attached, or even things that may have caused injuries, like there's a knife still in the body, I examine the body and document it at that point. Then the body is undressed, the medical devices are removed, and I do another examination looking for things that I couldn't see the first time, and looking at other marks of injury or disease. Then the internal part comes where we examine and make incisions to look at the internal organs. And we take body fluids and tissues for study and laboratory testing.
So as you can see, she has a fair amount of expertise doing autopsies and other things like that, doing death investigations. She's been in that job long enough to have accumulated the kind of expertise that is necessary. And now let's let her talk about the laboratories that she's used.
When you send toxicology samples, do you always use the same lab?
No, I use one of two labs. In 2018, I don't know if I only used one or two labs. I primarily use a lab called NMS for most of my cases, but sometimes, at least now, I send some cases to the State Lab of Hygiene.
Now, I mentioned earlier how important it is that the medical examiner is independent. And so, in this case, one of the things that the prosecutor does, and it's smart, is to start off with the medical examiner's initial assumptions. And her initial assumptions were that there was probably some existing disease state that caused this death. And let's listen to her testify here.
In terms of the autopsy itself in this case, were there remarkable findings that kind of pointed you in a certain direction about what the manner of death might be?
Because there were a number of medication bottles at the scene, there were scattered pills on the floor, there was powder kind of ground up on her body, there was a thought that maybe there was an ingestion was a possibility for the cause of death. She had also been recently released from the hospital, and she was on a lot of medication, so she clearly had some medical conditions, so perhaps natural disease was the cause of death. So I would say initially that was my thought.
Now, as she's going through this, you can tell that she's thought a great deal about this and that she's given some thought even to how her testimony might be received. Now let's take a listen to how long it took her to get to a cause of death in this case.
Ultimately, Dr. Budritsky, if we could, Ms. DeValcanier could flip back to Exhibit 34, please. When did your protocol get finished in this matter?
Sometime after I determined the cause of death. So the death certificate would be signed first, then it's just the paperwork of including all your data and proofreading the report and signing it.
And Ms. DeValcanier, if we could please show the witness Exhibit 36. Dr. Budritsky, this is a single-page exhibit. Do you see it on the screen before you?
Yes.
What is it?
This is a cause of death letter that we send because death records are not available in general to everybody. Only, next of kin typically, it's a vital record. But the information that I determine regarding cause of death might be necessary to release so that people know what the determination of cause of death is. So it's basically a short form saying that. So this is a letter I constructed, or the office constructed, based on what was on the death certificate of Lynn Hernan regarding the cause and manner of death and how the injury occurred.
What's the date on this exhibit?
September 27th, 2019.
And remind the jury when you did the autopsy?
October 4th, 2018.
So fair to say a lot of time passed between the autopsy and your determination in this case?
Yes.
Is that common?
This long, not common, but there were 4 different submissions for toxicology, and I wanted to be very sure, based on what my final determination was, that I had not failed to consider any further or new information.
So it took 11 months for her to come up with a cause of death that she felt she could support and that she had ruled out other causes of death. Now, the reason that's important is not because of the bottom line decision here. What's important is that she comes off as completely reasonable. She explains this reasonably well, and then she goes on to talk about the manner and cause of death, and Those of you who followed the case, you know that the manner and cause of death, the manner is homicide and the cause of death is tetrahydrozoline, that they sometimes refer to as THC, which is a bit confusing since when I think of THC, I think of the chemical that's in marijuana. Be that as it may, that's how they describe it. This is a good choice of an expert, and it's a really good choice for the Waukesha Medical Examiner. She's calm, she's articulate, and yet she's speaking in a way that everybody can understand. She's not using a lot of big fancy words and terms. She's telling the jury exactly what happened. I point this out because at some point in time, if you're ever on a jury, you are likely to be asked to listen to expert witness testimony. An expert witness who really knows his stuff can explain it in simple terms. And as we often say, if you can't explain it in simple terms, you don't know enough about it. And that, I think, is the gold standard, the benchmark for a good expert. So hopefully any of you who do wind up serving on a jury and do have to consider expert testimony, hopefully this video will give you a basis to think about how the expert testifies, whether or not they are conversant not only in their field, but also with just speaking to folks who maybe don't know everything about forensic pathology. I had to go, my wife asked me if I would make vegetable soup for her tonight, and so I had to go to the store this morning, and I always go to the same Publix. I sometimes go to the Wimpy Wally, the neighborhood market that's not a real Walmart, so we call it the Wimpy Wally. At any rate, a lot of times I'll go there if there's something specific that I need, but most of the time I go to Publix because I really love the people. And there is a really nice African-American lady. I always try to get in her line. Not only is she quick, but she's also pleasant, and she recently had carpal tunnel. And so I always ask, how's your arm doing? How are you feeling? And we had a nice conversation today about how much better she was doing after her surgery. I think it's really important when you do business with people and you see them on a regular basis to ask about them. And if they've had something like surgery, inquire. Make it known that you care about people. People who don't care are just glad the lady is not in the cast any longer and is a little quicker running things across that scanner. But I like to think that I want to be that customer that everybody wants to wait on. And if I can be that customer, then maybe I can convince other people to be that customer. If you model the behavior that you want to see in others, a lot of times you'll start seeing more of it. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have the opportunity yourself, do something nice for somebody and be kind, be thoughtful, and catch me back here at the beach next time. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.